Hey, my lovely friend. So, why did Kamala Harris lose in the US election? Piers Morgan is exploring this topic, and we're going to learn some vocabulary together. Let's do
Whatever the
this.
prescription should ultimately be, the diagnosis is surely crystal clear. Trump has made commanding inroads with working class voters, black voters, Latino voters.
The first expression of today's lesson is to make inroads. To make inroads. This means to gain influence. It means to make progress. It is to attract someone. So Pierre says that Trump managed to make inroads with all kinds of voters. He managed to influence their choice.
Urban voters and young voters. It's a veritable rainbow coalition of disaffected people who are Democrats.
It is a veritable rainbow of coalition. So, this is a colorful way of referring to a large group of people of different backgrounds. Veritable emphasizes the fact that this is not fake, this is not phony, it is genuine, veritable, veritable. And he managed to attract disaffected voters too. A disaffected person is someone who has no hope and they don't support the system anymore. They are not loyal to the system anymore. So let's go over and hear those words again.
Trump has made commanding inroads with working class voters, black voters, Latino voters, urban voters, and young voters. It's a veritable rainbow coalition of disaffected people who are Democrats have traditionally relied upon and more recently taken for granted. So what drove them away?
Now, he also says that Democrats have taken those voters for granted. They thought that, for instance, Latinos and Black people would vote for Democrats, but they didn't. They took them for granted. They didn't appreciate them.
Was it government-funded operations to transgender illegal aliens? Was it prioritizing SNL and 60 Minutes over Joe Rogan and Theo Von? Was it the warm embrace of Liz Cheney and a hawkish, even conservative stance on
a hawkish stance? Let's talk about the word hawk. In politics, this refers to a person who typically supports an aggressive approach to something. And the adjective for this is hawkish. For instance, this could be a politician who supports waging a war or they want a conflict because they believe that this is the way to resolve a particular problem. So we have the word hawk as a noun and hawkish as the adjective.
transgender illegal aliens? Was it prioritizing SNL and 60 Minutes over Joe Rogan and Theo Von? Was it the warm embrace of Liz Cheney and a hawkish, even conservative stance on the wars in Israel and Ukraine? Was it gaslighting America into believing Joe Biden was so sharp because
Was it gaslighting America? When a person is gaslighted or gaslit, they are told a big lie. They are asked to question their reality. So he says that some Democrats told Americans a big lie that Joe Biden was sharp, was bright, was on the ball. But in fact, he wasn't. So he is exploring all these different reasons for Kamala's defeat.
concrete and meant ousting him for a simply dreadful candidate in Kamala Harris?
So what happened was that they ousted him. To oust someone is to get rid of someone, usually again in politics. They ousted Joe Biden, they got rid of him, and introduced another candidate, Kamala Harris, that Piers believes was dreadful, was very weak and incompetent. Let's go back and hear this bit again.
Wars in Israel and Ukraine. Was it gaslighting America into believing Joe Biden was so sharp he could slice concrete and meant ousting him for a simply dreadful candidate in Kamala Harris? Maybe it was all of the above, delivered with the customary liberal serving of supreme self-confidence and the firm belief that everyone who disagrees with them is a moron or a bigot.
So they did this with a lot of confidence, with hubris, with arrogance. And they pretended like this would be the solution to the problem there. So the word bigot that he used there suggests that Democrats believe that whoever disagreed with them was someone who didn't have an open mind. They were prejudiced. Maybe they were a bit racist. Maybe they were transphobic. And this word, bigot, is a noun. If you want to use the adjective, you should say bigoted. It's a very strong sounding word, so be careful of the use of this word.
But joining me for an uncensored battle for the heart and soul of the Democratic Party, the host and founder of the Young Turks, Cenk Uygur, presidential historian and pollster Professor Alan Lichtman, Democrat influencer Harry Sisson, and author of New Prize for These Eyes, a senior political analyst at Fox News, Juan Williams. Well, welcome to all of you. Juan, in particular, a long time since I've spoken to you. Great to have you, I think, making your debut on Uncensored, so thank you very much.
You are making your debut. A debut is a first appearance. It's the first time that someone makes an appearance. It could also be the first time that someone publishes, for instance. Debut.
This is blue on blue, chaps, so you can rip into each other to your heart's content.
You can rip into each other to your heart's content. As much as you like, you can criticize one another severely. So let's talk about the expression to rip into someone's, to criticize them. Now, the other expression is to your heart's content. We've had this phrase before. It means as much as you like, to your heart's content. Pay attention to the pronunciation.
And hopefully out of it, we may get some form of consensus over certain ways that the Democrats could go.
Hopefully, we will reach that agreement, that consensus. So consensus is kind of like a formal agreement or a conclusion that a lot of people agree upon.
Well, let me start with you. When you look at the election and you look at the thumping win Trump got and who he won it with, do you think this whole campaign by the Democrats to portray him as racist, sexist, transphobic, Islamophobic, a Nazi, blah, 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 did they just over-egg the devilment souffle?
Did they overrake the devilman souffle? Souffle is a light, fluffy dish. So he says, did they blow this out of proportion? Did they exaggerate the problems? The problems were there, but they were not significant. Did the Democrats exaggerate these problems? Is that why they lost?
And just in the end play into his hands?
Well, I think they thought, based on the numbers, that this was going to be an effective form of attack, and I think it was for the base of the party. But I think that there were a lot of people who were attracted to other parts of Trump, and I think the whole macho man thing, it worked. You know, you were talking about a rainbow coalition. No, it wasn't a rainbow coalition.
Macho usually describes someone's manner or behavior that is too masculine and perhaps coming from a place of arrogance and pride, hubris, macho. And typically we use this word to describe men who exhibit these traits. Let's pronounce it together, macho.
But I think that you saw white men still go big for Trump. You saw the Latino men, and I think that's the big story of the election. Latino men suddenly went towards Trump, and there were some black men. I think it was a male thing, and I think, again, the idea that he said offensive, vulgar things about women, the fact that he is, and, says he wants to be an authoritarian, that's all true. But I think a lot of the men said, you know what, we like it.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I mean, Professor Lichtman, you correctly forecast the result of 9 of the past 10 US presidential elections, but not this one. Like most pollsters, I have to say, very, very few people predicted a big win, other than I might, if I may be so modest, I did. I went on Fox News 10 days before with Brian Kilby and said, I think he's going to win big. But actually, most people thought it would be incredibly tight and it could go either way and so on. But it wasn't that at all. Why do you think Trump is so difficult to poll, which is clearly the conclusion I would draw from this?
Well, I am forthrightly willing to admit.
I am forthrightly willing to admit. When you are forthright, you are open and honest. And we use this adjective in an approving way when we want to say that someone is honest, they're open, maybe about their mistakes. So he says that I am forthrightly willing to admit that I was wrong.
I missed this election. I still think I actually had 10 out of 10 before. I think I was right about 2000, but we're not here to litigate that. I still think it's a pretty good record. Now, I think two things are operating here. Number one, I was incredibly critical at the time of the spineless, cowardly Democrats.
A couple of adjectives to describe someone who is not courageous at all, someone who is very timid. The first one is an adjective which is pronounced spineless, someone who doesn't have that backbone, they're spineless. And the other one is cowardly. Now, if you wanted to talk about someone who doesn't have even an ounce of bravery, you could call them craven. So again, another strong sounding word.
Openly and viciously trashing their elected president and their elected nominee right out there in the open. I have never seen that before, and I've studied American politics since the founding, and that tainted any nominee.
That tainted any nominee. Normally, we use the word taint to talk about someone's reputation when their reputation is spoiled. So sometimes you will hear certain accusations targeted at someone to taint their reputation, to sully, to spoil their reputation, to smear them. A couple of good words
And
there.
they're now taking no responsibility for that. They're blaming everybody else. Until they look in the mirror, the Democratic Party is going to be in trouble. Secondly, why did my keys miss? Because my keys are based upon the proposition that a pragmatic, rational electorate decides whether or not the White House party is governed well enough.
A pragmatic person or a pragmatic approach focuses on practical things instead of focusing on a very fixed set of ideas. The antonym for the word pragmatic is dogmatic, which is awful. So pragmatic is used approvingly to talk about an approach or a person who cares about practical matters.
To get 4 more years. That was exploded this time by a new wave of disinformation that we've never seen before.
Disinformation is the spread of false information in a manipulative way. So there is the difference between misinformation and disinformation. Disinformation is manipulative. They promulgate a set of ideas in order to trick people, to deceive them. This is disinformation.
In addition to the usual sources of disinformation, we had a huge change this time. A 300 billionaire, a guy who's richer than most countries of the world.
He's alluding to Elon Musk. To allude to someone or something is to indirectly talk about them, to mention them in a very indirect way. So he's alluding to, and it typically goes with a preposition to. He's alluding to Elon Musk.
Who controls X, spreading vast disinformation. According to reports, billions upon billions of viewers saw his disinformation. People have a completely distorted view of the economy.
What was the disinformation?
Thinking inflation is going up.
Let me pin you down on that, though. You say Elon Musk was spreading disinformation. Like what?
Yes, he is spreading vast disinformation that's sunk in. Even people who think they're...
When something like an idea sinks in, it becomes embedded in someone's mind. For instance, sometimes I say in class, I hope the ideas have sunk in. That means you get them, you understand them. So he says that misinformation which was spread actually worked. It managed to deceive people.
Own financial situation is pretty good. Think inflation is going up when it's been cut by 75%. That unemployment
but it's still
is
inflation.
a near high when
It's
it's
still inflation,
near
Professor.
a low.
On that point, see, it's interesting. You would say that's disinformation, but the point is that inflation is still not zero. Therefore, prices are still going up. Therefore, people.
The only way you get inflation to zero is with a recession.
Yeah, but here's my point.
Obviously.
Here's my point. Yeah, but here's my point. Democrats kept telling the American people rather arrogantly, I thought, the economy's in really good shape. Meanwhile, inflation still exists. In other words, prices have continued to go up and up and up, albeit not at the same rate they were going up. But if it wasn't zero, and it wasn't, it was like 2.5% or whatever by the end, that is still inflation. So it's not disinformation to say
the only
Americans
way
are
you
still
get it
suffering
to
inflation.
zero is a recession, is deflation. That's ridiculous. Inflation has been cut by 80%, but it's not just inflation that people are wrong about.
But do you accept
It's
inflation
every
means prices are
aspect
still
of the
going
economy.
up? Do you accept prices were still going up?
Of course.
Right, so
They
that's the point.
always do, unless
But
you have a recession.
That's not disinformation,
That's ridiculous.
then, is it? By Elon Musk,
And it's
that isn't
disinformation about every other aspect of the economy as well. Disinformation about.
So the word that I could introduce here is vehemently. Vehemently is a great adverb when someone opposes an idea, when they disagree with someone or something in a strong way, they are vehemently opposing that person or that perspective.
Undocumented immigrants, like they're the bloodthirsty killers. They are the most law-abiding segment of our society. According to numerous studies, including by the Libertarian Cato Institute, they commit crimes, including violent crimes, less than half.
A law-abiding citizen is a citizen who respects the law. They follow the rules. They don't break them. A law-abiding citizen. It's a good adjective.
Half of that of Native Americans, and they don't drain our economy. They are the mainstay of the agricultural, construction, personal service, hospitality industries. Studies show you will drive the economy into a recession if you go through large-scale deportation of immigrants, and you will sweep it huge numbers of U.S. citizens because all the databases used to identify undocumented immigrants are.
So what he is contending, what he is asserting is that when you deport, when you send a lot of immigrants back to their home countries, you will bring about a recession, a lot of economic distress. You will bring the economy to a halt.
Fundamentally flawed. You can't have a pragmatic electorate under these conditions, and the mainstream media.
Electorate is a great word. It refers to the voters, the people who are eligible to vote. Electorate. And typically we use that with a definite article, the electorate. Pay attention to the pronunciation there, electorate.
Is utterly feeble. It spends 20 times more time on meaningless polls within the margin of error than it does telling truth to power.
So he says that they are utterly feeble. Feeble means weak. They are not strong enough. They are not assertive at all. They are feeble.
And indicating the consequences of this election.
But it is
it's
okay.
being taken over by billionaires.
Okay, I'm going to come to Cheng. I mean, Cheng, the biggest deporter in American presidential history was Barack Obama, who deported over 3 million people. This idea that Trump is going to become some outlier in terms of mass deportation. The great mass deporter was actually a Democrat president, Obama, by a long way, by the way. So this idea of disinformation, I think some of it was disinformation, but it's, I think the idea that this election was only won through right-wing disinformation, I'm afraid, I view that as a total delusion by the Democrats. Again.
Yeah, I totally.
So when you describe someone as delusional, you mean that they have a distorted view of reality. They can't see straight, and they're dreaming. They are not looking at what's going on in real life. They are delusional, and this is a delusion, Piers.
Totally agree with you. I'm sorry, but I totally disagree with Juan and Professor Lichtman. Don't blame the voters. I think, look, we could get into this discussion, but Juan, I think you're blaming the voters. I think that's a terrible idea. Look, I debated Professor Lichtman before. I told him his theories about the keys were absurd. I was right. He was.
He says that the theories are absurd. They are ludicrous. They are ridiculous. They are not true at all. Absurd. Absurd. With stress on absurd.
Wrong. I said he'd lose his keys.
No, you were
Couldn't
not
find
right,
him
and
before
I
the
was
election.
not wrong, and that's a cheap shot, and I won't stand for it.
Well, who won, brother?
You should not be
Who
taking
won?
cheap
Who
shots
won?
at me.
Who
You
won?
want to make your
You
point,
live
make your
in a
point.
total
Don't make it
world of
personal.
denial.
I read your own followers' comments, and they all trashed you, every one of them, and supported me. So
Yeah,
quiet
right,
with
right.
your personal
yeah,
attacks.
come find out again.
Make whatever
Okay.
point you want.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't
Look,
Okay, so it looks like this discussion is descending into ad hominem attacks, and this is where we will wrap it up for today. Ad hominem is a personal attack, which is usually not very constructive in a debate. Anyways, I hope you've learned at least one new word with my video lesson. Catch you in the next one.